I'm Ivy Langston, and yes, you read that right. My sister booked her $180,000 birthday party at my venue without telling me, then posted a video pretending it was hers. I watched the clip in silence, her voice chirping over perfectly filtered footage of my rooftop garden. Manifestation works, babes. Look at this magical space I locked down for my big 3-0. I didn't exist in the story she told the world. Just like I rarely existed in hers, unless she needed something. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was realizing my entire family knew. They knew she used my business, my staff, my property, and they expected me to stay quiet and foot the bill, like always. A week earlier, I'd shown up at my parents' house in Portland for dinner, already bracing for the emotional landmines. My mother had smiled with her trademark coolness, all air kisses, and comments like, "You still wear flats? Interesting." My father barely looked up from his crossword. And Jessa? She sprawled across the sofa, in some ethically sourced silk set she definitely didn't pay for, scrolling through her phone like it owed her money. Then, mid-lasagna, she'd stood up and raised her wine glass. "Big news," she'd said, voice syrupy with performance. "My 30th is going to be iconic. Champagne wall, imported florals, a drone show. Oh, and it's at the Willow and Slate, obviously." She turned to me with a grin that didn't touch her eyes. "You'll cover it, right? I mean, it's not like you have kids or anything important to spend on." The table had gone quiet. I looked at my mother, waiting for her to say something, anything. Instead, she folded her napkin delicately and said, "You know how much these things mean to Jessa, sweetheart? You've always been the responsible one." My father kept chewing. Nobody flinched. That was the moment it clicked. I wasn't family. I was funding. I smiled then, tight and practiced, and excused myself from the table before the silence collapsed my life. Now, watching Jessa's Instagram video rack up likes and laugh reacts, I wasn't shocked. I wasn't even hurt. I was done. She thought this was over a party. She had no idea what she'd just started. I hadn't been back to my parents' house in nearly 8 months. Not because I was too busy, though that's what I told them, but because I knew exactly how the script would play out. It was always the same. Tension served on porcelain, sarcasm disguised as affection, and me, the placeholder for whatever they needed that day. That evening, the sky was bruised with Oregon rain clouds, the kind that make the street lamps flicker before sunset. I pulled into the gravel driveway with that familiar weight settling in my chest, like my ribs were already bracing for impact. My mother, Deborah, answered the door wearing mauve lipstick and disappointment. "Ivy," she said, voice too bright, "you look so natural. Very Portland of you." She kissed the air near my cheek and ushered me in before I could reply. My father, Elliot, sat at the head of the table, glasses perched on his nose, eyes fixed on the local paper as if it might rescue him from having a daughter who doesn't post curated brunches. "Evening," he mumbled. I offered a polite nod before turning toward the couch, where Jessa lounged like a bored heiress in a showroom catalog. "Look what the forest dragged in," she smirked, tucking a strand of bleached blonde hair behind her ear. "Didn't expect you to come out of hiding before solstice." I didn't bite. I never did. Instead, I slid into a chair and took inventory of the table. Deborah's heirloom china, pressed linen napkins, and a single bouquet of eucalyptus and baby's breath. Minimalist for show. That should have been the first clue. We ate in a strange rhythm. My mother commented on the garden. My father said something about freeway construction. Jessa, in the middle of dinner, paused to take a selfie, tilting her phone carefully so I wouldn't appear in the shot. And then she did it. She stood, lifted her glass, and cleared her throat. "Okay, so, my big 3-0 is around the corner, and I want it to be unforgettable. I'm talking private venue, fire dancers, champagne towers." "The works," she grinned, all teeth. And guess what? I already booked the Willow and Slate. My fork paused midair. You what? She waved a hand. Relax, I pulled a few strings, the date's locked in, I just need my favorite older sister to fund the dream. She said it so casually, like asking for a lift from the airport. I glanced around the table, expecting someone to laugh. No one did. My mother reached for her wine. You've been doing so well lately, Ivy. Isn't it time you gave back a little? My father kept chewing. No eye contact. No objection. I looked at Jessa, whose smile was now smug with certainty, and realized something chilling. This wasn't a request. It was a decision already made without me. I was never asked. I was just assigned. I drove home that night in silence, the windshield wipers keeping time with the knot forming in my throat. Portland rain always had a way of making everything feel heavier, like even the sky was tired of pretending. Back in my house, my quiet, plant-filled sanctuary, I kicked off my shoes and sat at the kitchen island, staring at nothing. I poured myself a glass of wine, not because I wanted to relax, but because I needed something to hold on to. That's when my phone buzzed. A message from Tamsin, my operations director. You might want to check Jessa's latest post. My stomach turned. I opened Instagram, and there it was. A split-screen reel. On one side, Jessa clinking glasses with her event planner, laughing in soft lighting. On the other, a shaky clip of my car pulling into my driveway, windows down, rust by the wheel well clearly in frame. The caption, "When your rich sister lives like she's in hiding." I stared at it, frozen. The comments were already piling up. At least she's not pretending to be glam. That car screams therapy. Sustainable queen or just allergic to style? I wanted to scream. I wanted to reply to every comment and explain exactly what I'd built, how that car was paid off, how that house was bought in full with no cosigner, no handouts. But I didn't. I just sat there, jaw locked so tight I could feel my molars grind. It wasn't just about the video, it was the casual cruelty. The public ridicule from someone who had everything handed to her, including my patience. The part that gutted me wasn't the strangers laughing. It was the knowledge that my own sister chose the applause of strangers over the dignity of her own blood. I closed the app, set the phone face down. My chest ached in that familiar, invisible way. The kind that doesn't scream but lingers, like background noise you can't turn off. I realized then, this wasn't an isolated incident. It was the latest scene in a long-running play where I was always cast as the quiet one, the helper, the funder, the fallback. And the scariest part? They all expected me to stay in the role. Smile, swallow, pay up. I stared at the glass in my hand and thought, not this time. 2 days later, just as I was reviewing vendor contracts at my desk, I saw her, my mother, through the frosted glass of the lobby doors. No appointment, no warning, just there, like a force of nature wrapped in perfume and pastel cashmere. I thought I'd stop by, she announced breezily, balancing a loaf of banana bread in a floral print Tupperware as if she were arriving for a garden tea instead of an ambush. Still no receptionist? You really should make this place more welcoming. I forced a polite smile and gestured toward the guest chair in my office. Hey, Mom. She sat with the ease of someone who'd already decided the outcome of the conversation. You work too hard, she said, scanning the space. Just like your father, though he was never great with money, you get that part from me. Her voice was light, but I could feel the gears turning beneath the surface. Then she pulled a thick, cream-colored envelope from her handbag. I brought something for you to look over, she said, like it was a scone recipe. I took it cautiously. Inside, a full event budget breakdown for Jessa's birthday. Line items neatly color-coded, logos from high-end vendors, everything dripping in excess. And there it was, my name underlined in pink highlighter. Venue contribution, Ivy Langston, $180,000. Confirmed. My throat went dry. Confirmed by who? I asked, voice sharper than I meant. Her smile didn't falter. Let's not make this harder than it needs to be, sweetheart. You know Jessa doesn't have that kind of money, and your father and I are on a fixed income now. You've always been the responsible one. The word expected hung heavy between us, unspoken but loud. I set the envelope down like it was radioactive. She publicly humiliated me, I said flatly. And you're handing me the invoice. My mother waved her hand dismissively. She's going through a phase. Don't take it personally. I stared at her, something in me cracking. Not from pain this time, but from clarity. Thanks for the bread, I said, handing it back with the kind of calm that makes people nervous. She looked wounded, like I'd slapped her. Don't be like this, Ivy. You're making it so dramatic. No, I said, standing. I think you've just confused the definition of that word. She left with the envelope still on my desk, and I stared at it for a long time, not because I didn't know what to do, but because now I finally did. After she left, I didn't tear the envelope up. I didn't rage or cry or storm through the office like some burned soap opera heiress. I just slid the papers into a drawer, labeled them evidence in my mind, and opened my laptop. This wasn't a breakdown, it was a briefing. I wasn't going to scream. I was going to document. Tamsin? I called through the glass. She popped her head in, tablet in hand, already reading my expression. We've got a situation, I said. You better start a folder. Within the hour, we created a new digital trail. Emails, messages, booking forms, contracts. Every single breadcrumb tied to Jessa's event. Tamsin added timestamps, flagged anything signed without my consent, and quietly looped in our legal contact on BCC. Do we cancel? She asked. I shook my head. Not yet. That afternoon we noticed a curious reservation in our system, entered by an external agency. The client name? JL Creative Enterprises, a placeholder alias for Jessa's brand. The booking, full Grand Garden package at Willow and Slate. No email, no phone call, no heads up. She'd book my venue like it was a hotel room on Expedia. Tamsin raised an eyebrow. She thinks if the wheels are already in motion, you won't have the heart or the PR courage to stop it. I smiled thinly, opening the security camera archives. Let's see if she dropped by in person. There she was. Footage from the day before, striding across my ballroom like she owned it. Her stilettos clicked on the reclaimed oak floors, hand gesturing dramatically to a wedding planner I didn't recognize. She twirled, pointed toward the terrace, laughed. She's rehearsing, I said quietly, like this is a stage. Tamsin watched with me, silent. What's the plan? I leaned back, eyes never leaving the screen. We don't stop her, I said. We don't fight her in the lobby or send snippy emails. We let her build the whole thing. I paused. And then we let her bury herself in it. Tamsin opened a new folder on the shared drive. Unauthorized event booking. JL. Underneath, she created a subfolder. Communications. Paper trail? She asked. I nodded once. No, I said. I want a mountain. I didn't need revenge, I needed clarity. I needed receipts. And this time, I'd let her write them herself. It happened on a Thursday morning, 2 days before the event. I was at my desk going over the week's schedule when a single message from Tamsin popped up on my screen. Ballroom camera, too. Now. I didn't hesitate. I clicked into the live feed, and there she was. Jessa, storming across the center of Willow and Slate like it was her personal movie set, heels stabbing the polished floors, voice raised just enough to draw blood without screaming. This is the color scheme? She snapped, glaring at a stunned decorator mid-arrangement. It looks like a budget Pinterest wedding. This is not luxury. The florist flinched as Jessa snatched a rose from the centerpiece and let it drop dramatically to the floor. My followers will eat me alive if they see this. Who approved this palette? Mother Nature? A young staffer passed by carrying folded linens. Jessa pointed. Hey, linen girl. That's not the fabric I asked for. Do you even read the order sheets, or are you just here for the vibe? The girl blinked, English clearly not her first language, and tried to offer a smile. She kept walking. Jessa rolled her eyes and muttered, Unbelievable. Is anyone here literate? My jaw tightened. I watched without blinking. She was spiraling and handing me ammunition with every word. Then she grabbed a clipboard off the table, skimmed it, and slammed it down so hard it skidded across the marble. That's when Tamsin stepped into the frame. Calm, composed, in full command. This is a private venue under contract, she said evenly. Our team deserves professional respect, Miss Langston. Jessa turned slowly, looking Tamsin up and down like she was beneath her shoes. Spare me the TED Talk. Do you even know who I am? Tamsin didn't flinch. Do you? For a second, the room froze. Even the florist stopped moving. Jessa huffed, tossed her hair, and muttered something about her lawyer. But I wasn't listening to her anymore. I'd heard enough. Every insult, every arrogant dismissal, every moment caught on high-definition camera, logged, dated, and saved to the server. I minimized the video and opened our internal policy folder. Section 3.2, Client Conduct, Hostile Behavior Towards Staff, Public Defamation, Willful Disruption, every box checked. I dragged the footage into a new folder titled Termination Justification. She thought she was playing pretend, but she handed me the playbook. And this time, I was the one holding the curtain rope. Saturday arrived like it was waiting for an audience. The willow and slate ballroom glowed under soft amber chandeliers, every orchid perfectly placed, every gold-rimmed glass catching the light just right. From my upstairs office, I watched it unfold on the surveillance feed. My space, my team, my name behind every corner, and not a soul downstairs knew it yet. Tamsin stood near the grand entrance, calm and polished in her black blazer, greeting guests as they arrived. Then Jessa made her entrance, gliding into the space like she was stepping onto a red carpet, Caleb just behind her, handsome and stiff. Her parents-in-law, Vivian and Gregory Renault, followed with quiet grace, powerful people who didn't need to announce it. Jessa's voice echoed off the marble as she gestured grandly to the terrace. Isn't it perfect? Imported crystals, Austrian chandeliers, so exclusive. The owner only works with a few elite clients. Vivian tilted her head. And who's the owner? Jessa paused for just half a beat too long. We have connections, she said with a forced laugh. That was my cue. I stepped out of my office, heels clicking deliberately on the stone stairwell. As I descended, the room turned slowly, like a lens refocusing. I stopped midway, let my gaze find Jessa's, and gave her a faint, practiced smile. The kind that said, I see you, and am not here to fight you. I'm here to end this. I reached the last step, walked directly to Vivienne, and extended my hand. Welcome to Willow and Slate, I said smoothly. I'm Ivy Langston, the owner and creative director of this estate. Gregory blinked. Vivian's brows lifted, but her eyes gleamed with something close to admiration. You're the owner? Jessa stammered, her voice small now. But you live in that tiny house? I turned to her, steady. A smart woman doesn't wear her assets on her sleeve, I replied. She builds them brick by brick, and lets them speak for themselves. Vivienne smiled slowly. How refreshing. I was beginning to think no one under 60 understood discretion anymore. Gregory nodded once. Impressive, Miss Langston. Caleb looked at me differently now. No pity, no confusion, just understanding. Jessa tried to re-enter the conversation, but no one turned. Tamsin stepped forward. Shall we move to the East Terrace? She offered with practiced poise. As the group walked off, Jessa remained behind, frozen. Her breath came fast, fists curled, lips twitching like she might cry or scream. I didn't flinch. I didn't stop. I walked past her without a word, without a glance. For the first time in my life, I didn't need their applause. I had the floor. That night, I sat in my kitchen, every light turned off except the one above the stove. The house felt different. Not quiet from absence, but quiet from relief. I sipped chamomile tea, letting the warmth settle into the spaces that used to ache. Then my phone buzzed. A single text from my father. "Can we talk?" I stared at it for a moment, then tapped call before I could overthink it. He picked up on the first ring. "Hi, princess," he said, his voice heavy with something between awkwardness and avoidance. I said nothing. The silence stretched until he added, "I just think, maybe don't push things further, okay? It's still Jess's birthday week." I let out a dry, almost laugh. "That's what you needed to say? Not I'm proud of you, not you handled that with grace? Just don't make waves again?" He sighed. "It's not like that. It's exactly like that," I said, my tone flat. "I stood right in front of you all. You looked at me, and you still didn't see me." There was a long pause. "We just want the family to stay intact," he murmured. "It's never been intact," I said quietly. "It's been built around Jessa, like a house of cards. You let her suck the air out of every room, and I was the insulation. I was the foundation, but no one ever looked down long enough to say thank you." Another pause. "You don't mean that," he finally said. "I do," I replied. "Steady now. I'm not angry, I'm just done." Then, without ceremony, I hung up. I slid the phone into the drawer next to the sink and closed it gently. No slamming, no trembling hands, just done. Outside, Portland's street lights blinked against the night, and somewhere in the distance a jazz melody floated from a bar a few blocks away. I leaned against the counter and breathed. Not the kind of breath you take to calm down, but the kind you release when something finally lets go of you. I wasn't waiting for anyone to show up anymore. I wasn't hoping someone would apologize or clap or explain. For the first time in my life, I didn't need to be needed. And in that stillness, I realized something. I didn't lose my family. I just stopped asking them to show up. That was the difference. That was the peace. 2 weeks passed. No apologies, no headlines, just silence, the kind that didn't echo anymore. It settled. Willow and Slate hadn't slowed down. If anything, we were busier than ever. 3 weddings booked, a corporate wellness retreat, and an inquiry from an event designer in San Francisco who'd seen our layout featured in a sustainability blog. Tamsin entered my office with her usual confidence and a raised brow. "You'll like this one," she said, handing me her tablet. At the top of the screen, "Client request, Vivian Renaud's niece, asked for you directly." I smiled, and it wasn't performative. It was real. "We'll take care of her," I said, personally. That same afternoon, I got a push notification from an industry news site. Influencer event canceled. Speculation mounts about behind-the-scenes drama at elite venue. No names were mentioned. They didn't need to be. Out of curiosity, I checked Jessa's profile. Her latest video was a far cry from the curated, glowing content she usually posted. Dim lighting, no makeup, no music, comments disabled. She stared at the camera for almost 2 minutes before saying anything. I didn't finish watching. Not because I couldn't, but because I didn't need to. There was no rage in my chest, no vindication, just air. I closed the app, placed the phone face down, and walked out onto my front porch with a glass of wine. The wind stirred the rosemary in the planter. The sun had just started to dip, casting long orange streaks across the street. I glanced toward my parents' house on the next block, slowed my thoughts just long enough to wonder if they were home, and then kept sipping. I didn't stop. I used to think peace came when people finally treated you right, when they apologized, when they saw you. But peace, real peace, is quieter than that. It's choosing not to respond. It's deleting the message and not waiting for another. It's saying no without explaining why. For years, I believed being a good daughter, a good sister, meant making myself small so others could shine. But shrinking never saved anyone. And you can love your family and still draw a line. You can walk away without hate and still never look back. I didn't win by being louder. I won by finally listening to myself. And if that's not power, if that's not peace, I don't know what is. The story of Ivy Langston teaches us a powerful lesson about self-worth, boundaries, and quiet strength. For years, Ivy was the dependable one, the sister who sacrificed, the daughter who paid without question. But love that demands silence and guilt is not love. It's control wrapped in obligation. When her family expected her to fund her sister's lavish lifestyle and mocked her simplicity, Ivy didn't explode. She evolved. Instead of fighting fire with fire, she chose dignity over drama, documenting the disrespect and letting her actions speak for themselves. The turning point came not when she embarrassed her sister, but when she stopped needing validation. Ivy learned that real peace doesn't come from forcing people to treat you right. It comes from finally treating yourself like you matter. Setting boundaries doesn't mean you're bitter. It means you've decided that being used is no longer a form of loyalty. In a world that often equates loudness with power, Ivy reminded us that quiet clarity is stronger than rage. You don't have to scream to be heard. Sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is walk away, and mean it, because walking away isn't weakness, it's healing, and sometimes, it's the only way to finally come home to yourself.